Testing. Hello, everyone. Apologies for my tardiness. I was still thinking, oh, I got 10 minutes still. But how easily we fall into routines. Okay, I'd like to start out with a little trivia question. Anybody know what Ruth, Jezebel, Sennacherib, and Nebuchadnezzar have in common? I have a disparate group of people there. They are all non-Israelites that have come up or are coming up today in our character studies. So Ruth, of course, was from Moab, but ended up kind of being integrated into the Israelites and being an ancestress of Jesus. Jezebel from Sidon was the bad lady who married Ahab and introduced Baal worship. And then today, Sennacherib and Nebuchadnezzar. Two guys that were very large, very big players on the world stage. Ruth, not so much a big player at her time, at least, or so it seemed. Jezebel, a pretty influential character in the area right around Israel. But Sennacherib and Nebuchadnezzar, I suppose their names may have been known. Well, they were known around the world. Both very powerful men, but from different empires. What I'd like to do in our lesson today is give you a little bit of familiarity with them, but especially how they tie into the history of the Israelites. We're dealing with a portion of history that is extremely consequential to the Israelite nation and to Bible history, but one I think that for one reason or another really isn't all that well known. So I'd like to give you an overview of it today and trying to keep a pretty high level view of it. If you look at our timeline that starts at the beginning of time and then goes up to the birth of Jesus, we're getting closer and closer to the birth of Jesus, and quite close chronologically to the end of the Old Testament. The last book of the Old Testament written in about 400 BC, and today we're dealing with guys at 700 BC and in the 5 and 600s BC. So we've been doing it. So I thought I'd continue doing it. Does anybody know anything about Sennacherib before we start? I thought Sennacherib, yeah, probably going to be crickets. How about Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar, I think we know a bit more because of Daniel mostly. Maybe that's too much of a hint. Okay. Daniel in the lion's den was actually different from Nebuchadnezzar, but Daniel was still in the same place. It's just that there was a transition going on between the Babylonians and the Persians at the time. But the three men in the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had been deported from Jerusalem over to Babylon. They were very gifted men that he conscripted to serve in his administration. At the beginning of the book of Daniel, there's this bit about the food that they were eating not being compatible with Israel's dietary restrictions. So Daniel and his friends came up with a really clever way to not have to eat the food. You had the fiery furnace, the really tall statue that Nebuchadnezzar built that preceded that. But he plays a large role in the first four chapters of the book of Daniel. He is also the one who destroyed Jerusalem, and he burned down Solomon's temple. He was a mighty conqueror. So was Sennacherib, but Nebuchadnezzar is the one that finally got Jerusalem. All right, next thing, the themes of the day. This is always just seems to be a step behind me. Okay, themes of the day. Archaeology. Things that we've talked about so far, we've talked about Ahab and David and such, and there are archaeological artifacts that have been found from their times. There's not a vacuum of artifacts from them. But when we get up to the Assyrian Empire, which was Sennacherib, and the Babylonian Empire, which was Nebuchadnezzar, it just abounds. You can read what's in the Bible or in other historical places, and then you can go to the places that are mentioned, and you can see the legacy of the battles that were held there. And I want to just give you a taste. I showed you this slide last time. This is from the British Museum in London, which has a whole lot of stuff from the area around Mesopotamia and Egypt. But I wanted to show you this picture. So I went to this museum. It was like 1996. I still didn't know anything. I didn't really know what I was looking at, and I still wouldn't know that much today. So I was probably in this room. But this is a room from Sennacherib, one of Sennacherib's palaces, that is pretty much like an 8th century BC video of the conquest of Lachish, which was a fortified city just outside of Jerusalem. Later on, I'm going to show you more close-ups of it, and we'll read the Bible's account of the battle, and then we'll be able to see the video of it in portions of this wall. So that's a bit of Assyrian history. Oh, there's one more thing that's... This is something Sennacherib wrote. Well, probably had written. It's cuneiform, so you'd go to a library back then, and a little bit different from the libraries that we grew up with, very much different from libraries today, but wrote on a cylinder, and we have Sennacherib's account there of his conquest of Judah and, the siege of Jerusalem, which we'll learn about in a little bit. Another awesome artifact. If you think about like going to a museum and looking at stuff that's in glass boxes and stuff and being, oh, wow, that's really old. There's this museum in Berlin called the Pergamum Museum. And this museum, its specialty is big stuff. This is the Ishtar. I'm not going to call the TV bad names, but I want to. Okay. This is called the Ishtar Gate. Nebuchadnezzar built it. This was a gate of Babylon. Until I looked more closely, and when I went to see this, I'm like, wow, like this is what like the Israelites that were deported from Jerusalem to Babylon, like they would have walked through these gates. I think I was wrong though. I think the best estimate is that they were built in 570 BC. But even then, Daniel would have walked past these same bricks, because he was in Babylon in 570 BC. So that's pretty neat. Look at the size of the people. Remarkable. I think that they broke it up into pieces before they moved it, because Nebuchadnezzar didn't build it in Berlin. All right, so that's some of the, we're going to look a little bit more at archaeology as the class goes on. The other theme of the day, the Lord of history. We're going to be dealing with empires for whom Israel, especially by its end, was hardly a blip on their radar screen. But what they did to Israel was things that God had been warning the Israelites about as far back as Moses. It seems like you have power-hungry men who are looking to make a name for themselves in history. But this is finally and ultimately speaking God at work, using history to accomplish his purposes. The purposes that we're looking at today are really a hard thing, is because it's finally God saying enough, and he uses these nations to bring judgment on his people. Let's get a 30,000-foot view of where we are in time. This is on the one side of the handout. We're we're pretty familiar with the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. We had the other handout that I think you framed and put on the wall in your home. Above here, we had the first kings of the United Kingdom, Saul and David and Solomon. I didn't have room for them vertically, so I cut them out. But here we have the kings of the divided nations, Judah and Israel. Green are the ones that we've talked about in our study. So we started out talking about Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon, who told the people, "I'm going to tax you even more than my father did." And then the people in the north were like, "Okay, we're not going to be part of we're not going to play with you anymore." And then they started their own country, of which Jeroboam was the king. We've looked at Ahab, and then most recently, last week, we took a sampling of Israel in its darkest days spiritually, and also of Israel, Jeroboam the second, where everything was great politically, militarily, and economically, but spiritually they were down the tubes. And very similar for Manasseh. He was the king who was, sacrificed his child in the fire and used God's temple to make this all-you-can-worship buffet of false gods, and God had him carted off to Babylon. So just to give you that view of where those guys fall in time, and then where we're at today. Today, our interaction with Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is going to connect us to Hezekiah, who actually came before Manasseh, who we studied last time, and then also Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. Before I go on, I kind of want you to see that we're a little bit jumping over the board as far as time goes. An explanation for this piece that I put between the kings of Israel and Judah. So I have kings of different empires that at least partially coincided with the reigns of the kings of Israel and Judah. First came the Assyrian Empire. We talked about them a bit last time. The Assyrians have been called like the first true empire of the world, where they conquered a huge swath of land and integrated different peoples into it, and it kind of did a halfway decent job of administering everything and keeping it a unit. So Assyrians, really the first empire. Following the Assyrians was the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar. And then following the Babylonians was the Medo-Persian Empire. And then this is really probably stretching. See if we have any history scholars in here, or people who like those comic book movies. I've never actually watched one, but 300. Isn't there one called 300 or something? Okay. Anyway, anybody know who was the big empire after the Medo-Persians? Alexander the Great. Yeah. And then who came after Alexander the Great, or after the Greeks? Then Rome. Yeah, so just to give you an idea of where we fit in here. Babylonians they were kind of a flash in the pan time-wise. Medo-Persian probably goes down to about there. And Assyrian starts a lot higher, but it's kind of hard for me to picture all this stuff going on. I don't think that when there was an empire change that, that everybody made new maps and everything and everybody knew what was going on. You had a lot of different tribes and peoples vying for power and stuff. So it's not always as neat and crisp as World War I and World War II history today, where there's a winner and then everybody agrees on the new borders and all that. Okay, one more thing about the Assyrians. Some of these kings are shifted over toward the Israelites, and then some of them are shifted over to the people of Judah. And what I intend to show through there is that their interaction was with Israel, their interaction was with Judah. So I just want to take you first through the destruction of Israel, and we'll do that just super quick through pictures. In 738 BC, that would be during the reign of, so hard to keep all this straight. 738, where Pekahiah and Pekah. Assyria was up here, but then under a rather famous King Tiglath-Pileser, they started coming down. Assyrians were generally okay with you living as long as you paid fealty to them and gave them their tribute and stuff. But if you cross them, then you were, and I'll show you some pictures. Show you some pictures of what they do in a little bit. That's what the kings of Israel did. So Tiglath-Pileser did not take kindly to that. They stopped paying him tribute. They would try to ally themselves with Egypt now and then, but Egypt was kind of powerful, kind of not. Assyria was really powerful, and it was Israel was kind of sandwiched in between. A lot of ping pong going on. So finally, in 722. After Tiglath-Pileser had conquered the northern part of Israel, two kings, Shalmaneser V and Sargon II, they laid a 2 or 3 year siege to Samaria, and then finally it fell. And again, we talked about it last time a bit. They just deported the people to different places, make them disappear. Because if you're not a people connected together by geography anymore, you're gone. 10 northern tribes, gone. Okay, so that's what's happened to the north. 722 BC, really important date in Israelite history. Judah, well, I mean, after that happened, you had Manasseh, who we talked about last time, and things were going pretty well after Manasseh. But remember, you don't want to cross the Assyrians. And Manasseh's father, Hezekiah, did that. Sennacherib, his reign coincides with that of Hezekiah. We may remember some things about Hezekiah besides that he was the father of Manasseh. Hezekiah gets a thumbs up. He's called Good King Hezekiah. There were some other okay kings before Hezekiah that had kind of stamped down on Baal worship, but none of them ever had like a really thorough religious reform. The Israelites kept their high places where they worshipped false gods and kind of pretended to worship the Lord. Hezekiah, he was a good guy. Like he swallowed hard, and he got rid of most of it. But then he also decided to take advantage of some anti-Assyrian sentiment and stop paying tribute, and for that he would pay. 700 BC, under Sennacherib. Hezekiah revolts, and Sennacherib throws the full weight of his army and his empire behind just squashing Jerusalem. I showed you that prism before with the cuneiform on it. So in there he talks about, I certainly can't come close to quoting it, but he destroyed 46 of Judah's fortified cities. So you have a city that is around, the perimeter of Jerusalem, meant to, it's there for the sake of war, and he destroyed 46 of them. All that was left was Hezekiah and Jerusalem. There's a lot of, so I'm told and see in pictures, a lot of archaeology you can see in Jerusalem from this time. Hezekiah knew that Sennacherib was coming for him, so he tried to secure his water supply and keep water away from the Assyrians. And I guess you go to Jerusalem. I don't know if anybody here has been there and seen Hezekiah's tunnel. So it's like a tunnel that people I think you can like walk through it, and it diverted water from a spring to a pool inside the city. It was like hewn out of like a quarter or a half a mile of like solid rock, like all in anticipation of this siege. He tore down houses in order to make and strengthen a wall. Like he was digging in. Like this was going to be a tough thing to go against Sennacherib. But Sennacherib wrote on that prism that after he had conquered those cities, namely Lachish, he talks about Lachish right there. He said that Hezekiah was like a caged bird in Jerusalem. There was nowhere for him to go. And here is where I would like to read with you out of the Bible, and then we'll look at the pictures. Then we'll look at the pictures from that video in the British Museum. A big section. Do I even have it in here? We're going to do Isaiah chapter 36. This siege is recorded in 3 different places in the Bible. It's in Isaiah because Isaiah was a prophet in the royal court at this time. It's in 2 Kings, and it's also in 2 Chronicles. A lot of the words are the same. There's a few differences here and there, but 3 accounts of it in the Bible. We're going to read from Isaiah chapter 36. At the point that we're going to read, Sennacherib has destroyed all of the fortified cities, and now he's coming to Jerusalem. If you're Sennacherib and you want to take Jerusalem, you could do like, you have the army and you have the time, but you can take it. But wouldn't it be a whole lot easier if they just gave up and kind of like everybody gets to skip a whole lot of misery? Certainly it would be easier for Sennacherib to just take the bird right out of the cage. So what we're going to read about, he sends an envoy to meet with representatives of Hezekiah at Jerusalem's wall. And the goal of these envoys is to talk loud enough and scary enough for all the residents of Jerusalem within earshot of the walls can hear it, so that they turn against Hezekiah and give up. What do we call that? Psy-ops, right? Psychological warfare. Here's my plan. It's a longer section, and I'm going to ask Audible to read it for us, if the TV cooperates, which you know how that works. Okay, I have it set to 1.4 speed, but it's still follow along, it's still very readable.
In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Then the king of Assyria sent his field commander with a large army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. When the commander stopped at the aqueduct of the pool on the road to the launderer's field, Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, Shibna, the secretary, and Joah, son of Asaph, the recorder, went out to him. The field commander said to them, "Tell Hezekiah, this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? You say you have counsel and might for war, but you speak only empty words. Of whom are you depending, that you rebel against me? Look, I know you are depending on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff which pierces the hand of anyone who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who depend on him. But if you say to me, we are depending on the Lord our God, isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar? Come now, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses, if you can put riders on them. How then can you repulse one officer of the least of my master's officials, even though you are depending on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Furthermore, have I come to attack and destroy this land without the Lord? The Lord himself told me to march against this country and destroy it. Then Eliakim, Shibna, and Joah said to the field commander, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, since we understand it. Don't speak to us in Hebrew in the hearing of the people on the wall. But the commander replied, was it only to your master and you that my master sent me to say these things, and not to the people sitting on the wall, who, like you, will have to eat their own excrement and drink their own urine? Then the commander stood and called out in Hebrew, hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in the Lord when he says, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah. This is what the king of Assyria says. Make peace with me and come out to me. Then each of you will eat fruit from your own vine and fig tree and drink water from your own cistern until I come and take you to a land like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Do not let Hezekiah mislead you when he says, the Lord will deliver us. Have the gods of any nations ever delivered their lands from the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they rescued Samaria from my hand? Who of all the gods of these countries have been able to save their lands from me? How then can the Lord deliver Jerusalem from my hand? But the people remained silent and said nothing in reply, because the king had commanded, do not answer him. Then Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, Shebna, the secretary, and Joah, son of Asaph, the recorder, went to Hezekiah with their clothes torn and told him what the field commander had said. Isaiah.
Can we just identify, well, first of all, that delegation from Sennacherib to the representatives of Hezekiah, who did they really go to talk to? They weren't so much interested in giving information to Hezekiah's representatives. They were talking to the people. And can we identify some of the arguments that they made in the hearing of the people for them to just give up?
You still have your food, your vineyards, you just be in a different place.
Yeah, it's going to go a whole lot. It's going to go a whole lot better for you. We have a little bit of good cop, bad cop, I suppose you could say. That's a good cop talking.
They bring up the other nations that went down.
Yeah,
Those
yeah,
gods giving their-
yeah. Look at what we've done to the others.
Say how can the Lord save you if the king already took down all the high places where you worship and whatnot?
That one I think is really interesting.
You didn't recognize that those weren't their gods, I guess. That's not who they're talking about.
Yeah, I think that Sennacherib's representatives I think that it's not that they don't know Israel's true God and their worship system, but trying to leverage on any anti-Hezekiah sentiment among the people who are like, Hezekiah takes down our high places, and then they're like, yeah, and he took down your high places. How the Lord's going to rescue you now? And looking for any kind of wedge between the people and Hezekiah, and then just the savagery, they say, talk to us in Aramaic so that the people don't understand it. And they're like, well, that's exactly why we're talking to you in Hebrew, because we want the people to understand it. And they, like you, are going to have to eat their own poop and drink their own urine. The siege is going to get that bad. Let's look at what they did to Lachish. Okay, so here's some close-ups from the from that wall that Sennacherib had in his palace that's in England now. You can see the Assyrian soldiers beginning the battle against the city. It's got like 4 pictures, I think. Can you interpret it? Yeah. So when people say that the Assyrians, they're the first ones to really start crucifixion, I think that it's this kind of thing. I don't know if they had modified it from this, but you just put somebody on a semi-short pole and let gravity do the rest. This one might be a little bit harder to interpret. You can see Assyrian soldiers and then these guys without hats, Israelites. So these show like Israelite leaders who came out and surrendered at Lachish, and they're under the front ones are on their knees. They're under the complete subjugation of the Assyrians. So that's what the Israelites were up against. Can't cover all the history in here, but Hezekiah is pretty disturbed. And there's interaction between Hezekiah and Isaiah. Isaiah tells him, you're going to come out of this. Hezekiah prays to the Lord, and God says, tomorrow everything's going to be just fine. And that night, it says the angel of the Lord went through the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000 Assyrians, and then the rest of them marched home. So just like that, it's over. This was 22 years after they had destroyed Samaria and Israel. So Sennacherib goes home, and a while later, he's worshiping in the temple of his god, and two of his sons assassinate him, and then Esarhaddon, his son, succeeds him as king. So Sennacherib ended up being killed by his own kids. I was reading this with one of my kids and said, "Don't do that." And then after that, Jerusalem rebounds, and Assyria falls. It took a while for Assyria to fall, but it happened. After Sennacherib, we have Ashurbanipal. He was king for quite a while. But the amount of time between Sennacherib and the actual fall of Jerusalem was like a solid century. It was a long time. So things had gotten better again. I'll tell you a little bit about the fall of Assyria. So Assyria was in control, but there was a Chaldean tribe down here that used to be really powerful. Their power ebbed and flowed, but they were making a resurgence. And under a really talented general named Nebuchadnezzar in what was it, 612 BC. The Babylonians, they conquer the Assyrians at Nineveh, and then they also win a decisive victory against some remnants of Assyria, but mostly Egypt at Carchemish. And in 605, after that battle, then Nebuchadnezzar, he is the new boss in town. Again, they didn't redo borders like we do after wars. But just picture in 605, it goes from Assyria to the Babylonian Empire, like that. Now, mind you, that's 100 years later. So this is like the Nebuchadnezzar and Sennacherib. That's like Teddy Roosevelt to Barack Obama. And they're not of the same nationality either. I was looking for an example of, a different people group that's taken over a country in recent times. I can't think of any. I was thinking of Napoleon versus Charles de Gaulle in France, but they're both French. I don't know. I couldn't think of one. But a solid century there. Let's just do an overview of Nebuchadnezzar. We're gonna stop in 5 minutes, so I don't think we're gonna have time to read the actual section. I'd really like to save it for next time. Next time I have planned to talk about Jeremiah and Ezekiel. I think that'll work well because the prophet Jeremiah is right in the middle of things at the fall of Jerusalem. Like he falls too. Like he's right part of it. So looking at the sheet, the overview of Nebuchadnezzar. So he oversaw the defeat of the Assyrian Empire, the ascent of the Babylonian Empire, and the fall of Jerusalem. And then the last 4 kings of Judah. If you could be king of Judah, like at any time in history, don't pick then. Josiah came before Jehoahaz. He was Jehoahaz's and Jehoiakim's dad, I think. But he died in battle against the Egyptians. And then Jehoahaz became king. 3 months into his reign, he's taken captive by Pharaoh. So Egypt was a significant player. and then replaced by Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim and Zedekiah, they were both installed to be just puppets, like someone weak that the Babylonians can know is gonna, obey orders, not cause trouble. But they end up causing trouble anyway. Just they don't do a very good job of it. Jehoiakim. So 11 years, rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, rebellion swiftly put down. At some point, he was taken captive to Babylon. It's kind of hard to some of the chronology is difficult when you compare the different biblical accounts. Daniel and other gifted Israelites were deported to Babylon during his reign to serve in the royal administration. So really, like, Jerusalem is not a power to really take seriously at the time. They're like, we want these guys, and we're taking them. Jehoiakim, by the way, maybe you remember this from Sunday school along the way. Have you ever heard the one where God sends Jeremiah to the people in Jerusalem, basically to tell them, you see those Babylonians out there? They're not going away. Like, don't even try. Just give up. God says, give up. And then the false prophets in Jerusalem are like, no, the Lord is saying peace, peace. But there was no peace. And Jeremiah was right. But anyway, so Jeremiah, he'd preach his sermons, but he would write them down too. And, his scribe would write them down. And then his scribe Baruch took his prophecies to Jehoiakim, like, hey, here's a warning for you. And it's wintertime, and Jehoiakim is like sitting, in his room, and he's warming himself at the fire. And he reads a column of the scroll. And then he takes his utility knife, and he's like, he throws it into the fire, throws it into the fire. I think Jeremiah had a hard job. Like, I don't think I would last long if you did that. Like, if you did that when I preached, or like. Jehoiakim, he was another guy that was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar plundered Jerusalem. He replaced Jehoiakim with Zedekiah. And Jehoiakim was ultimately given a position of honor in Babylon. Was it after Nebuchadnezzar died? I can't recall. But I came across like a receipt from Babylonian records. Like, Jehoiakim was allotted this much olive oil this year, and here's the receipt for it. Zedekiah was the last one. 11 years after a 2-year siege of Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar plundered and destroyed the city and its temple, deported the people. Zedekiah tried to run away, even though Jeremiah said, don't try. And Zedekiah still ran away. He was running toward the Dead Sea, and then Nebuchadnezzar's guys caught up with him. And wouldn't this just be the worst? He brings him back to his post, and then he kills his sons right in front of him. And that's like the last thing that he sees. And then take out his eyes. Both would be bad. I think I wouldn't like either one. Okay, so that is way faster than I wanted to go. I really would like to read the section with you next time that describes this, because it shows us the Lord of history at work. By the way, there was a temple. There was a temple when Jesus was like around, and we heard today's like. I referenced it. He said, not one stone will be left upon another. You know who built that? Anybody know who built that temple? Excuse me? This is the one that Solomon built that Nebuchadnezzar burned down. Okay, after they come back from exile, they kind of build like One that they built a temple that they looked at and they cried because some of them still remembered Solomon's. And then it was Herod. King Herod greatly expanded it and was one of the greatest buildings of its time. Jesus prophesied that one would get torn down too, and that happened in 70 A.D. And okay, last question for you. Anybody know what's at that site now? A mosque. Yeah, that's that big golden dome you see. So no more temples there, and fine thing, because Jesus came. God dwells among his people through Jesus now. Okay. Let's say a short prayer, and I think we're going to say a meal prayer out there. So, Father in heaven, when we see your judgment against sin, let it be a warning to us about our own, that we don't take a backsliding away from you lightly, but fear your threats and take them to heart, and then once that fear has taken hold, take it away, not by excusing our sin, but by making us promise that but giving us your promise that you forgive it, that it's because of Jesus we have life with you that no one and nothing can take away, no matter what around us is destroyed or fails. Amen. All right, thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Probably not, but... Anders, can you stop that stream?